Awesome. So my name is Sadia. I'm a writer and content strategist at Pinterest, which is in San Francisco. I'll be talking today about how we brought Pinterest to 33 languages in 8 months. Well, how we almost brought Pinterest to 33 languages in 8 months. I'll talk a little bit about how we set ourselves up internally for localization, talk about some experiments we tried to make our localization process faster. And then I'll also end with sharing some actual docs that we use at Pinterest to kind of keep the translation quality up and respond to some challenges. First, just a little bit about me. So I've been at Pinterest for over a year now. I'm 1/6 of our writing team. The writing team at Pinterest really serve as the content strategists, and we work across all of the product copy as well as the marketing. I actually focus most of my work on monetization and business content, especially as we're rolling out our first ads product. But the rest of the time I spend kind of working with translators on localization. Before that, I worked as a content strategist at the Barbarian Group, which is a digital agency in New York, which, as you might imagine, is a very different experience from working at a startup. And my actual background and training is in journalism. So I thought it might be helpful to first explain what Pinterest is, since it is pretty new to Europe and many of you might not be familiar. So Pinterest is a place to discover ideas for all your projects and interests, handpicked by people like you. So people use Pinterest to save things that they find on the web. These visual bookmarks we call pins, and they can also go onto Pinterest itself to discover pins around their interests through friends that they follow or through specific search results. There are over 30 billion pins on Pinterest right now, so you're destined to find something that you're interested in. And people organize their pins onto secret and public collections that we call boards. And then they can kind of use those pins later, whether they want to click back on the pin to learn more about that website they came from or to actually take an action like buy a product. So you can use Pinterest to find ideas for your next beach vacation or to save recipes for your next Sunday meal. You can also even use Pinterest to explore real-life collections online, like the Metropolitan Museum of Art puts up many of their exhibits using Pinterest. So as you can see, there's like a lot of interests that are covered. And what we hear from our pinners, and pinners is our term for users, so you'll hear me say that a lot. We try to avoid using users as much as possible, though I am sometimes guilty. What we hear about when they use Pinterest is that they often describe it as experiencing a state of flow, which means that they get really in the zone and kind of get lost in the product, and that means it's a really safe space for them to kind of dream about the future. And so for us, it's really important that Pinterest is a welcoming place for anybody to be creative. There should be few distractions, and you should feel comfortable, especially as you're exploring things around your interests on this site. And that means that we have to build a product that people connect with no matter where they live. Whether we're naming features or sending out privacy notices, we have to speak the local language. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do that right now, and hopefully you'll be able to take some lessons away based on whatever organization you're with right now. So the first thing is pretty obvious. You have to get yourself set up. You have to establish a foundation. You can't just decide tomorrow, I'm going to start localizing my website into 33 languages. You do have to kind of get some things in place. And for us, that first meant, you have to really figure out who you are. And I mean that partially from a, brand personality perspective, but also, figuring out how your organization process works. And we've heard a lot about that today already. It can be difficult to get buy-in on the kind of work that we do, and localization is no different. So for us, that means while we are a startup and we have small teams, and the benefit of that is we can actually move pretty quickly. There's not a lot of layers of approval, which I know is very rare in our world. On the flip side, that means that things come out and they're not perfect. Sometimes we ship things really quickly and we aren't able to kind of give the thorough review that we would have liked. The one thing that we really benefit from, though, and again, I know this is very rare in content strategy, is we have two co-founders, and that's Evan and Ben. We call them Bevan affectionately. They actually, from the beginning, placed a premium on quality communication. So we didn't have to fight to exist. They knew that writing was really core, and they hired us early on. And because we had that support from the top down, basically, everybody at the company had to get on board, whether they were designers or engineers and product managers. And so it really gave us space to do something that you guys are super familiar with, which is crafting the voice for your company. When I started at Pinterest, we were kind of right in the throes of this exercise. My manager, Tiffany Jones-Brown, she was able to do some internal interviews about, early employees, our founders, what we care about. And when I started, we kind of really began to put together some of that work, and we landed on our Pinterest voice, which we describe as, at a basic level, clear, conversational, and honest. And we think that that's just kind of table stakes for good web writing. We don't think that we're special because of that. But where we do want to stand out is in being extra warm and, where it's appropriate, delightful. And that means we want that voice to kind of be true throughout the product, whether you're a frustrated pinner who's visiting our help center. We want people to feel like, okay, I have a place for Pinterest, where Pinterest is going to help me out. Or maybe we're educating you on a new feature. So this is actually an animated GIF from our new search product, and we tried to make it really real for people, because they might say, okay, whatever, it's search, it all works the same. So we tried to give examples. And even on our business site, we have a separate business site, we try to avoid the technical marketing jargon that you often see. Even though we might be working with very sophisticated, CMO types, we wanted to make sure that even if you were a blogger or a small business, you could use Pinterest to work for your business. So we wanted to just make sure that that voice was something that we could carry throughout the product. And so then once we kind of landed on that voice, I was sort of tasked with, okay, well, we're translating, and now you must ensure that this voice exists in all of our languages, which was kind of a scary task. Before we could kind of get into the actual translation, we actually, had to have a pretty robust team in place. And so many companies wind up using large vendors to kind of take care of all their translation needs. We thought about this, and we actually decided against it. We thought using a big vendor might slow us down. And to be honest, we liked the idea of having people in different countries on the ground, kind of translating very natively, and could tell us about sort of changes in web writing in their markets and that sort of thing. So we actually use a service, we use Odesk. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Odesk, but it's a freelance marketplace, and they have helped us find translators around the world. So Odesk sources candidates from their pool. We give them a linguistics test that's specific to Pinterest. Odesk handles kind of the scoring, and then I go and interview each kind of finalist to make sure that they really care about voice and care about Pinterest. So now we have at least one reviewer and one translator per language. In some languages, we have more. It just sort of depends on how many hours certain translators want to work and how much time they want to spend on Pinterest specifically. So Odesk really handles scheduling and payments, and they've been a huge help to us in that way. And then we kind of interface with the translators when we're actually talking about specific products and wanting to give them context, and we still kind of have that personal relationship with them. And then we kind of picked a translation tool, and we use a tool called Smartling, which is a little bit of a newer tool on the scene, and we found that it's been pretty helpful. It's imperfect, but because they're really new, they're also really receptive to feedback because they want more clients. So we'll give them feedback that says, hey, we don't really like the way this UI works, and they'll make a change. So I would check them out for sure if you're looking for a kind of a quick translation tool. And so once we got that tool in place, all of our engineers now, anytime they build something, any of that copy goes straight to Smartling. And lastly, and most importantly perhaps, we hired a really great product manager that was specifically focused on localization. And she has a much more technical background than I do, which means she was really able to make inroads with engineers, especially as we added new features or we're coming out with new products. So she's always the first to say, okay, where are we launching this? Is this thing coming out in just the US? If it's only in the US, when are we going to expand it to other parts of the world? So she really keeps internationalization top of mind throughout the product. So, after you get set up, you should be willing to kind of experiment and try new things, even if they don't turn out the way that you expected. So, one big experiment we had was community translation or crowdsourced translation. So, this idea is that we would get some of our most active pinners to do the work for us for free. And we thought this is going to help us, move really quickly. And, we're engaging our pinners and showing them that we value their feedback. And we were just expanding into the Nordic languages, and we decided that that would be a good testing ground for us, especially because we had a pretty engaged population there. So we sent out invites to our most active pinners in the Nordic languages, invited them to access parts of SmartLing, our translation tool, also invited them to a private Facebook group so that they could talk amongst themselves about translation. I insisted that we hire a professional reviewer to sit on top at the very end to make sure that it was all going to be okay in the end. But as you might imagine, the cheapest and fastest option was kind of a mess. So, for example, this thread on Facebook. That is just one conversation for the Finnish translators on how they should translate the word pin. So that's the only topic of conversation in that thread. And, it's awesome to see how passionate our pinners are, and they really did care about these words, but it was unwieldy and for us, and it was just really difficult to manage. And it was just a lot of cooks in the kitchen having opinions. And ultimately, it created a lot of extra work for our translator, our professional reviewer. So we did move really fast. I think we translated Finnish. We had all of those strings, as the copy is called, done in 3 weeks, and which was blazingly fast, but they had to do so much work to make it consistent that it ultimately wasn't a good decision for us, and that's something that we're going to try again. But we knew lots of other places had done it, like Foursquare has done it. SmartLing actually offers tools for crowdsourced translation to make it easier to get multiple users in there. But it was, as you can see, a little bit crazy for us. We've also tried different ways to customize Pinterest based on where you live. So on Pinterest, we have categories. So you can explore pins and find things around different subjects like women's fashion or home decor or cars and motorcycles. And when we were going into Japan last year, we knew some research, and we decided maybe we could try subcategories, because the Japanese population, there are so many niche interests. So we have a category on Pinterest called geek, and that word didn't resonate with the Japanese. And they were no, we have lots of very specific things that we're interested in. And so we tried it with subcategories, and it actually just didn't work out. We're not even sure why that didn't go very well, but people didn't wind up wanting to use those extra subcategories. They liked the more broad ones. Something that we're still testing out is mixing up the local and global content that you see when you use Pinterest. So when you log into Pinterest, you can visit the everything feed or things that are popular. And what we've done is, based on where you live, we've been kind of experimenting with how much comes from people that live near you versus how much is just global. And it's varied market by market. So in France, people love seeing stuff from French pinners. They actually get a little upset that when they see stuff from Americans. So, and make of that what you will. And whereas in Japan, the pinners really liked being connected to the global community. They love seeing stuff from around the world and kind of being what's on trend and that sort of thing. So we've just kind of had to, figure it out by market. And I think the point really is that, we've tried those two things, and we're still trying some new things, but you should just learn what you can. And so what we've learned is, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to localization, especially with a product like Pinterest that is all about your individual interests. It's really hard to just translate one version and hope for the best and hope that everybody gets it and feels comfortable using it. So right now, we actually have a tiered approach to our countries. In some countries, we've made a bigger investment. We've done upfront on-the-ground research. So this is a picture of one of our researchers in France making an at-home visit to figure out how people use Pinterest. So we've invested in research in some of those markets. We've hired a country manager, a community manager, a marketing manager. In still more countries, we've just hired a community manager to see if maybe just hiring one person to sort of come up with new campaigns will be enough to sort of get people engaged in those regions. And still, the majority of languages that we're in, there is no Pinterest on the ground presence. We've simply translated the product and actually seen pretty high gains just from doing that, especially, again, places that you wouldn't expect, like Indonesia. And so, it's harder to experiment, I understand, with a really large organization. It's harder to kind of take those risks, especially when you have more eyeballs on your product. And we're kind of running up against that too. And Pinterest is now at more than 350 employees, mostly based in SF, but now around the world. And despite that, we're still trying to stay scrappy so that we can move fast. And I have to admit to you guys, that means I'm a little bit more reactive than I would like. I'm not always anticipating the next challenge. I'm kind of dealing with it as it comes because that's sort of the best way to press forward. So, for example, we come across lots of different challenges, like what happens when your most important word is actually a dirty word? So something we learned last year is that pin has a sexual connotation in many languages, which was like devastating to us since it's like the core action you take on the site. In English, in US English, it's pinning to a board. But in French, it has a sexual connotation. I believe in Portuguese it does as well. So that was really hard for us, and it's also difficult for our translators because they're going to have to get a little more creative and like hope that people in the country like understand what they mean. Have we solved this problem? Probably not, not entirely, but what we've done is added as much upfront training as possible so that when a translator starts, they have a Skype call with me or a Google Hangout. We go through the voiced words that I just showed you earlier and kind of go into what that means. And then I go kind of do a deeper dive on, here are our keywords. So for pin in English, we have a nice metaphor, pinning to a board. Can you preserve that metaphor in your language? If not, is there a transliteration that we can use? So there hasn't been kind of a one set way that we've translated pin in different languages. I know there was some thought at one point to just having pin be English, but we actually got a lot of pushback from that because it just looks incomplete in many markets. So we've done just as much upfront training as possible. This is an example of this is our glossary. It's just a Google spreadsheet. It's huge. It's key terms that we use in English, and then the different languages are translated to the right. So as you can see, we're not super fancy here about our glossary. Another challenge is, so those voice tone words that you always see in content strategy talks is they're super important to defining your brand, but those words don't have universal meanings. So what is conversational in Japanese? What is warm in German? What do Germans find delightful? Those are things that we thought were sort of everyone understands the meaning of delight and warmth in US English, but actually we've come across a lot of circumstances where our tone in English just does not work. And that was something we didn't anticipate for. So sort of reactively, we created these international voice and tone guidelines. And we've broken this down with every language. Every translator fills this out after they start translating, once they have a handle of what Pinterest feels like and kind of see, the strings that they have to translate. And people can answer questions with this doc like, what is warmth in your country? We often use the phrase Pinterest is a place to discover and collect things you love. How do people feel about the word love in your language? What about exclamation points? What does good customer service sound like? And what are good examples of voice, both other websites or just maybe local celebrities we want to emulate? So this document serves two purposes. It is a place for us to kind of capture all of our nuance in one place, which is nice. And second of all, whenever we have new translators or have to replace a translator, this is a really good one-stop shop for kind of keeping everything together. So I'll run through some examples. So English UK was where we decided that we needed this doc. So we have a country manager in the UK, and she was like, guys, I love your writing, but I'm doing a horrible accent, I'm gonna stop. But she was like, the exclamation points. You and Americans love exclamation points. And we were like, yeah, like we're friendly and conversational and we want you to use our product. And she was like, it sounds like shouting and you use it with children. And we were like, oh. And so like you'll see there's a style note. It's pretty hard to read, but it says, use exclamation points sound like shouting and are used with children, replaced with full stops. So we've kind of cataloged down to that level of detail the nuances of different languages. And just for fun, celebrities they'd like to embody are J.K. Rowling, Colin Firth, Kate Middleton. So we have kind of detailed style notes. Another one in German, and I'm curious to hear what you would think. They said in Germany, according to our translators, they said, Germans don't love things. They find them interesting, curious, or useful. They may even like them. And we were like, okay, like that's really specific. And so we've kind of cataloged that. Another challenge in Japanese, we have to really toe the line because Japanese web writing is super formal, but we're not a formal product. And so we have to kind of decide, are we just going to cave to being really formal because that's what's conventional there? Or are we not and risk looking kind of childish or immature or kind of trendy and ephemeral? And we do we use more, formal pronouns, but we aren't afraid to get a little cheeky and tell jokes when it's appropriate there. And now our biggest challenge is kind of upcoming, which is how do you know the translation's good? Especially when I personally don't speak all of those languages. So, how do we know that we're doing a good job, that these translations are actually making a difference in maybe encouraging growth in our company and also staying on brand? And so something we're working on for the next 2 quarters is a quality audit. What this is going to mean is we're going to hopefully survey professional translators as well as our most active pinners to figure out what they think of our translation and how they sort of perceive our brand personality. Based on that, we'll assign each of our languages a score. Right now, I would like to think that our languages are at a 3, which I'm calling launch ready, which means we feel good that this is up and this is live. It's clear, it's free of mistakes, it's accurate. It may not be perfectly warm and delightful, and it may not have capture that local spirit, but we're okay with starting with this. I'd like to hope that we can get all of our languages to a 5. A 5 in my mind is something that delights local audiences but stays true to us, fits perfectly in design, all of those things. But we know that we're not there yet. And so that really kind of speaks to something that's really core to our company values that I would actually impress upon you guys as much as possible, no matter how big your company is. We always say progress, not perfection. And so we know that our translations aren't perfect, but we were able to kind of move quickly. And we know there's still lots more to figure out. We still need to figure out how to have a more flexible design, especially for those longer languages like German, or for languages that take up kind of wider, longer widths for bigger characters. We still have to find ways to give better context to translators. Right now, the way Pinterest works, and you might hear this about other tech companies, is we run experiments. We launch certain products in certain markets and not others. It's very hard to keep track of who's seeing what. And in many cases, we're reactive. Like a translator, something goes into SmartLang, and I get a bunch of questions, and I'm like, oh crap, this thing just launched, I had no idea. So I wind up having to send a big email to all of our translators, and I'll send them the copy deck and go through the flows, and we get there, but it's not always the most ideal situation for us. And then a bigger question is, how does translation quality actually affect growth? I have a sneaking suspicion that it matters, that your quality really affects how many people will sign up for your product and stay on it. But we haven't been able to kind of quantifiably make a direct connection just yet. That being said, progress, not perfection, has actually done well so far. So we're actually in 31 languages in less than a year, a little bit of an edit from when I submitted this proposal. And we're still growing. So actually, in the next month, you'll see a team for Pinterest on the ground in Germany. And we're also expanding to Brazil. And we're also going to tackle new languages this year, including kind of figuring out if we're going to start to move to languages that go right to left, like Arabic and Hebrew. So with that, thank you so much for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.